Evil is evil, Stregobor, said the Witcher seriously as he got up. Lesser, greater, middling, it's all the same. Proportions are negotiated, boundaries blurred. I'm not a pious hermit. I haven't done only good in my life. But if I'm to choose between one evil and another, then I prefer not to choose at all. Hello and welcome to Chris's Fantasy Space, the show where I go through my favourite fantasy and sci-fi books and give you a bit of a review and also my thoughts on them. Today, we are going to be looking at The Last Wish by Andrzej Sapkowski, the first book in the Witcher series. Pretty sure I absolutely nailed his name there as well. I'm going to try and not say it anymore. Anyway, during this lockdown period, I have actually played lots of video games, I've watched a load of movies, caught up on some TV shows, but the thing that I've done that's brought me the most joy easily has been getting back into reading. Reading fantasy, reading sci-fi was something that was so important to me when I was growing up, and it's been amazing just to actually get back into that. So I thought this video series might be a cool way of keeping up with the reading once lockdown is kind of over. Now, in terms of like the Witcher series, I never actually thought that I'd get round to reading this series. I thought it would just be something that I had where I'd play the game. I'd watched through The Witcher 1 and 2. I've never actually played those first two games, but I've played through 3. Pretty much with a gun to my head though. I started 3 years ago when it actually came out, but then my friend Andy, who I do the other podcasts with, he pretty much put a gun to my head and said, you must finish The Witcher 3 because it's like his favourite game. So I did finish it, really enjoyed it. Last year, there was a Netflix adaptation which starred Henry Cavill. As you might be able to tell, bit of a Superman fan, love Henry Cavill, so I was all in on that series as well. If you want to hear what me and Andy and a few other people thought of that Netflix adaptation, you can hear our Realise podcast about that, which is on our website or any podcast feed called Realise. But yeah, like I said, I never actually thought I'd get round to it. So when I thought, you know what, I like the show, I like the game, I might as well give the book series a chance. When I did a bit of research, I found that this book here, The Last Wish, was actually a collection of short stories. And I kind of thought, well, do I need to read this one or can I just go straight onto the first main novel? But I'm so glad that I actually did do this. You know, I checked out online and everyone was saying, no, you should definitely read The Last Wish. You definitely start off with that one. And I'm so glad that I did, because just calling it a collection of short stories, I think doesn't really do it justice in how it's set out. Yes, you have got your short stories going through, but you've also got these little, almost like intermissions at the beginning of the book and then after each short story and then at the end of the book as well, that kind of bookend what's going on in these short stories and give you a great introduction to the main character, Geralt of Rivia, and what he's like as a person. Really, really well done. So kind of the purpose of this book is to give you an introduction to Geralt of Rivia, who is the Witcher, what his job is, who he is as a person, and how the world actually looks upon him. And this book does such a fantastic job of that. And the fact that it's a book of short stories just lends itself so well to being able to go, right, Geralt goes to this town, he sorts out this problem, he goes to this town, he learns this lesson. It's just done so well. And when we start off this book, Geralt isn't a brand new Witcher. He's not a young boy who is being brought up in the ways of the Witcher and how to actually take down his first kill, things like that. He's been doing it for years. And he has become very jaded. He is a gruff man. He has got a very sarcastic and dark sense of humour. And in that way, it was quite a nice breath of fresh air from some of the other series that I've been reading recently. For example, during lockdown, I've been reading The Wheel of Time. I'm now like 10 books into that one. I'll come back to that for a little comparison later on as well. I'm bang up to date with all the Cosmo books. Massive Cosmo and Brandon Sanderson fan. Robin Hobb the Farseer trilogy was one of the first big fantasy series that I ever read, so it's got a massive soft spot in my heart for that. And Geralt is such a different main character to the main characters that you might see in those books, in that he doesn't really care too much, or at least on the surface, he doesn't really care too much about what people think of him. Even though I think as you progress through The Last Wish, you kind of see that he does, in a way, deep down actually want to be liked in a way. And it's done so subtly throughout this book, how you get that explanation. The other bit of amazing world building you get through this book is everyone else in the world's reaction to Geralt. You know, you'd think having a Witcher whose job is essentially to go around and kill monsters and keep towns safe, for pay, of course, you'd think that people would be quite pleased with that and actually really enjoy having a Witcher in town. but people really do not like him. It's almost like a kind of prejudice against him. And I think one of the main reasons for that is that in order to become a Witcher, as you find out through this book, you have to go through certain mutations. And that allows him to have these potions and these tonics that allow him to see better in the dark, have better reflexes, become more agile, stronger, so that he can take on these horrible monsters that he's got to kill. And the fact that obviously that's his job, traveling from place to place, dealing with these issues, it just kind of serves itself so well to being a book of short stories in itself. So it's quite a clever way of starting off and introducing your character in a series. Something that I found so nice and almost like refreshing with The Last Wish was its take on description and building a setting. Because like I said, the books I've been reading, one of the big series, one of the major fantasy series on the whole is The Wheel of Time. And the way that Robert Jordan decides to go about description and building a scene in those books compared to how Sapkowski does in The Last Wish is like the polar opposite of each other. For example, The Wheel of Time, if a woman walks into a room in one of Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time books, you will know her hair colour, you will know what she's wearing, what kind of dress it is that she's wearing, what shade of blue the dress is she's wearing, how deep the neckline is, how many buttons are on it, what jewellery she's got on, what kind of look she's got on her face, what kind of perfume she's wearing. You will know absolutely everything you could possibly know. And for me as a reader, sometimes I look at that and I think, that's great, I can really picture that person in my head and I love it. Whereas other times I'm sort of sat there reading thinking, oh, I really have to pay attention to how many buttons her dress has because that's going to come back later as some plot point. And obviously it doesn't. It's just the way that Robert Jordan builds his scenes. Whereas Sapkowski in The Last Wish, what he does is go for a much more minimal approach to describing everything. Yes, you get your bit of description, so you know where everything is, you know how things are happening. But it comes across as much shorter and to the point, which, like I said, was very refreshing while reading this, going from the massive books that I've been reading recently. And actually, one thing that I will say about that is it almost does a great job of mirroring what Geralt is like as a person. The short, to the point description of everything almost is a reflection of him as a person. He is to the point, he is gruff, he is jaded about the world, he wants to get stuff done, get paid, and that's it, he's out. So it's really cool how those things actually kind of mirror each other in a way. I thought that originally that might have something to do with the translation, because obviously Andrzej Sapkowski, he is Polish. I did not learn Polish for this for this review, for reading this book. I read it in the translation in English, and that was another another reason why I wasn't actually super excited about reading this series originally, because I knew it had been translated from Polish into English, and I wasn't sure quite how well that would translate across. So I thought, maybe some of the dialogue might be a bit clunky, maybe there'll be words that can't be translated properly and it might not read very well. Have absolutely no fear about that. These books read incredibly well. It got to the point where I got to the end of one or two of the short stories, and there was a sort of emotional impact, and it really got me, and I thought, wow, I'm so impressed that something that's been translated from one language to another was able to still have that punch and that impact that it meant to at the end of it. Another thing that's interesting about the tradition from Polish to English or to American, whatever you are reading this, if you're reading it in English, was the use of very well-known fairy tales. Now, I don't want to spoil anything too much, but my favourite use of it was in one of the short stories called The Lesser Evil. And what they do is they actually kind of have a different take on the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, where there's a princess who is forced out of her castle, her kingdom, and she goes and lives with a band of dwarven warriors, and of 7 dwarven warriors. So it's kind of a cool way of having a sort of nod to, a nod to the sort of Western fairy tales, that sort of thing, but also having its own spin on it. So I thought that was really clever, and there's a couple of other uses of that sort of thing through this book, The Last Wish, and actually the book after, the next short story book, Sword of Destiny, that uses it in a very cool way as well. So obviously, I've called this a review, which kind of in itself suggests that I'm gonna, have some kind of summary on it, maybe even give it a score. But I absolutely despise boiling art, whether that is a book or a movie or a video game or a TV show. I hate the idea of just going, yes, this is a 78 out of 100. This is a 2 stars out of 5. I hate the idea of boiling something like that down to that sort of thing. So I'm not going to do that. Having said that, when I finish a book on my Kindle, it does give me the option to give it a little star out of 5. So I always do it. This one I think I gave it like a 4. I really liked it. I liked it. But what I actually want to do, instead of just giving, boom, this is the score, this is my score that I give it, I actually would rather recommend it to you. So, for example, if you were someone who has played through the Witcher games, who has watched the Netflix adaptation, and you like it, if you like the Witcher universe, if you like the idea of having a very, like an older, a wiser, a gruff, jaded, dark, humid main character, this is for you. 100% you will really enjoy this. Okay, you will love it. Its take on action, its take on the violence and the prejudice in the world is obviously it's not realistic because of the crazy monsters and stuff that's going on, but it has a touch of realism to it, which is great. On the other hand, if you're someone who much prefers fantasy to be a traditional, I don't know, Lord of the Rings style of young male or female character, realizes they have to go on this huge epic journey, finds these powers that they have all the way through, and ends up having to go and defeat the Dark Lord, having come from humble beginnings. If that's what you want from fantasy, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Like, loads of my favourite stories of all time follow that pattern. Nothing wrong with it at all. But if that's what you want from fantasy, then you're not really going to get it from The Witcher. Not really going to get it like that. Okay. The other thing that I would say about this book particularly, and Sword of Destiny, the second Witcher short story book, is if you have watched the Netflix show starring Henry Cavill, every single short story in this book, apart from one, has been adapted for that. So if you've already seen that, you are going to be looking at some stuff that is very well known to you. For example, the first story in this is the story of not minor spoilers, I guess, for the first short story in this, is the story of Geralt having to fight the Striga, which is the princess that turns into sort of a monster. So I personally have seen that at the beginning of The Witcher 1. I've seen it on the Netflix adaptation, and now I've read it in this book. So I know that story like back to front. So if you know a lot of these Witcher stories already and from the adaptation on Netflix, maybe you might get a little bit bored by this. But what I would say is actually the one story in here that hasn't been adapted, it's not like the flashiest, most action-packed story, but it's a really good one, quite a touching message. So I would maybe even pick it up, have a look at it just for that personally. So I really, really, really enjoyed this book. I thought it was a fantastic introduction to Geralt of Rivia, to the Witcher series and the Witcher world as a whole, especially as someone who already loves that, the Witcher lore from the games and from the TV show and from everything else. So definitely something that I loved. I've also read the second book, Sword of Destiny, which I loved as well, probably maybe even more so than this one. I don't intend to come back and do a video for like each book in the Witcher series. I might do one again in the future when I've got up to date with all the books to give my viewpoints on maybe the series as a whole, but I don't intend to do one for each one of this. So, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to hear more from InDreams Club, then we have a PlayStation podcast called Bomb Squad, where me and Andy talk about all the recent PlayStation news. We recently did an episode on the PlayStation 5 reveal, starting to talk about The Last of Us 2 as well, which has got people up in arms. We also have a TV and film podcast called Realise, which again, me and Andy, and sometimes some guests as well, we talk about some of the recent big movie releases or things on TV. We did an episode on the Witcher series, like I mentioned earlier last year. We're currently in the middle of looking at the Dark Knight trilogy. We originally did a series on the Matrix as well. So feel free to head on to any podcast app or site that you like to find them, Bomb Squad and Realise. We can also check us out on our website, which is InDreamsClub.com, and follow us on Twitter at InDreamsClub. So thank you very much for watching. Definitely pick up The Last Wish if you fell into one of those groups that I recommended it to. I had an absolute blast reading this book. And I'll see you on the next Chris's Fantasy Space.